Fear by Kendrick Lamar is one of my all-time favorite songs. I feel like it gives me permission to admit something that is still a little bit taboo amongst black men. And while it's a hard thing to admit, being a black man means knowing perpetual fear. I was first introduced to this fear when my father helped me understand what had happened to Rodney King. And I might have been in the third grade. We'd watched this movie, Malcolm X, by Spike Lee, and the opening sequence featured a short clip of the assault. The clip showed a black man being beaten by these police officers, and to me, it seemed like he was being beaten to death. And the officers involved were acquitted of any wrongdoing. At that young age, my father helped me understand that police officers were allowed to do this to black men and that I should be careful. This terrified me, and it still does. But culture, society, and tradition teach me to never show that fear. So I, like many other black men, developed these instinctual psychological tricks and coping mechanisms so I can function every single day. And today, I believe there's value in acknowledging the fear, both internally and externally, learning how to articulate it, understanding its place and the broader context of my experience, and most importantly, using my artwork as a way to process it, even cope with it in a more constructive way. My introduction to artwork really began early on. As a kid, I struggled to find an identity that made me feel like I had a purpose. And I never really felt understood. I didn't feel seen. And my search for an identity led me to some dark and fairly unsavory moments. I sold a little bit of weed occasionally. It was still illegal back then. I had no interest in school, and my grades were trash. And to graduate, I had to go to Saturday school and night school. Even self-harm would sometimes creep into my thoughts, but something that was consistent, I loved making things. I just killed it. In all of my art classes, I loved arts and crafts. Give me some materials to work with, and I'll get you something cool out of those materials. So that led me to graffiti, which really saved my life, and it was the only thing that truly held my interest. For one, I got to choose my own name. I get to craft a persona. Second, I really liked trouble, so property destruction felt great. It was right up my alley. I could tell you stories, but we don't have that much time. Third, a wall looked like a giant canvas to me. And looking back, blank walls represented a place of infinite possibility. And I felt like I was in control of all of those possibilities. Having that kind of control, maybe even just that kind of power, it activated me in a way that I'd never been activated before. And it satisfied a creative urge in me that I didn't know existed. So I managed to get into university, Morgan State, down in Baltimore, as an art student. And at MSU, I was under the tutelage of a lot of really good faculty, and I was in the company of young, motivated black artists where I learned the value and importance of visual expression. We were a bunch of hip-hop heads, and so we swore we knew everything there was to know about everything. We talked about a new kind of a black renaissance and what that could look like. We talked about the power of art and visual communication. We talked about the beauty of blackness. We were, and still are, a family to this day. What united us is that we all had something to say, but we all struggled with knowing what that should be. A lot of us thought we knew what we were doing and what we were saying, and some of us had no idea what to say. And I would put myself in that latter category of not really knowing what to say. And that's really because my default feeling at the time, it was all anger. And when I was drawing, I felt like I had something to prove. And to a large extent, I still do feel like I have something to prove. I feel like I have to prove my worth, and it made me angry, but it stimulated an urge within me still. When I was younger, I felt like nobody understood me, and I felt like, oh, this art thing, drawing, painting, perhaps it's my voice. But either way, our teachers made sure we focused on the technique and the language of visual expression. They also would gently, and sometimes not so gently, remind us that we had a lot more to learn about life, but they saw us. And I think they knew something about us that we didn't know about ourselves at the time. By the end of my experience at Morgan State University, I was very confident in my skill. I still drew with a chip on my shoulder, but it still felt good to be making work. A series of events, both fortunate and unfortunate, pushed me to grow as a person. And when I started to mature a little, I recognized how clueless I was when it came to the question, what do you have to say with your work? And that became the dominating question when I got to graduate school in Boston. At the Museum School of Fine Art, alongside my experience at Northeastern University, the question just came up over and over again. What are you saying? What do I say? What do you have to say? With my classmates and with faculty, the same statement. You can draw really well, Jamal, but what are you saying, though? What story do you have to tell? And after a number of really rough critiques and talks with both classmates and faculty, something clicked. And I started to find depth in my emotions, and I never acknowledged that that was even existing. Being angry just made life so simple, but I came to realize that there was just more underneath all of it. To be clear, anger fueled me, and I felt like I didn't have a reason to dig deeper because it just came so easy. Uh, I didn't need to dig deeper because the anger just motivated me to work. And when I started to dig deeper, of course, there was still the anger, but there was also sadness from being so far away from home, from my friends, from Baltimore. There was a lot of pride because 6 years ago, I had been trying to graduate from high school, going to night school, going to Saturday school. There's anxiety about what the hell does an artist do when they get out of graduate school. But acknowledging that emotional depth, I was able to make a connection between complicated emotions and the language of visual expression. And before that, I was just laser focused on being good with the tools and developing my skill. And so my entire thesis was based upon the anger I felt about code switching, or I should say, the pressures of code switching, having to change my behavioral patterns based on who I'm with, changing speech patterns depending on the room that I'm in, lest I be seen as uncouth or unrefined, and that colors me in a way that I think is detrimental to my progress in the professional world. But either way, I couldn't figure out what to say until I knew myself better. The irony is that I've learned to use my work as a way to get to know myself since graduate school, and it's become this method of self reflection and self investigation. Um, at this point, I would say that I consciously use my work as a way to process my emotions, trauma, and personal identity. And my work is the primary mechanism and means through which I do that. It's a very public tool of self reflection, and it has caused me to confront this emotion that I've been trying so long to hide and get away from. And this is especially true after the summer of 2020. After the events, I felt it really, really urgent and imperative to get back to the thing that my father had helped me understand at such a young age. We've seen so many videos of unarmed black men being murdered at the hands of police officers, but George Floyd was different. And perhaps it was the stress of COVID, or maybe it was just one too many videos and a long timeline of these videotaped events, thinking about Tamir Rice, thinking about Breonna Taylor, thinking about all the names that came before Judge Floyd. Fear just came bubbling up to the surface when I saw this video. Seeing that man with a knee on his neck, watching the life being squeezed out of his body, it scared me to death nearly. It re-traumatized me in a way that I didn't think was possible. And my work and these videos, they're forcing me to acknowledge and confront this fact that I am a black man and I live in fear. I'm afraid when I get stopped by the police. What if they kill me because I'm reaching for my license and registration too fast? I'm afraid of being accused of a crime just because I'm black and in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm afraid of people thinking that I'm a criminal because I'm black. I'm afraid of being seen as an angry black man when I feel that I need to confront somebody about something that deserves confrontation. It's so deeply ingrained into my being that when I went for a jog in downtown Boston when the National Guard was deployed, with every step I took, I was terrified that the National Guardsmen would assume that I was a criminal running away from a crime scene. I mean, what if they stopped me? What if they pointed weapons at me? These are things that had to go through my mind with every step I took, but I still ran. But I was very, very terrified. Whether I acknowledge it or not, fear and trauma are among the major defining aspects of my experience as a black man since maybe the age of 9. And living as a black man is uniquely stressful. And I, like a lot of other black men, use all kinds of unique coping strategies to stay functional in life. And I've found that the best strategy that I have is my studio practice. My current practice is a method I use to process and investigate the origins of behaviors and trauma. My collaging process means that I work in layers, and I think of those layers as a metaphor for time. Each layer symbolizes an event, and each layer gets covered over by a new layer, similar to how events in time work. And a layer could be drawing, it could be a physical layer made up of aluminum cans, cardboard, or tape. It could also be color, which gets added to the composite. And this layering process becomes repetitive until I feel the need to reclaim something that happened underneath. Find something that's been covered, I should say. At this point, I start tearing into the work with hands and tools, and by the end, I'm left with this composite collage in which layers from the past, visually and physically, interact with the layers on the surface. When I work, I think about the parallels between how past events shape who we are at the moment and even shape who we might become in the future. I think about my father telling me not to sit with my back to the door when I'm in public, and to this day, I'm still very mindful of where I sit down when I'm at a restaurant. And to the unaware, it may seem like a benign behavior, but it's one of the many behaviors that come from black men being under constant attack for such a long time. It's a survival tactic that's been handed down from generation to generation. I mean, imagine that. Survival tactics that were developed generations ago in response to the constant threat of danger, they now shape my behavior when I sit down at a restaurant. My studio practice is a coping mechanism, and it's a very public way of processing my emotional experience and my trauma. By bringing these self investigations to the public space, I'm hoping that my vulnerability reveals my humanity and sets the stage for empathy. By being vulnerable, hopefully people will see the humanity in the community that I represent, that we have fears, we have needs, we have desires, we deserve recognition, and we deserve empathy. If emotional vulnerability is one of the faster routes to emotional understanding, I think that's important and count me in. Art is my mechanism for being vulnerable, for expressing fear. We all understand what it feels like to be afraid of something. The collective fears that we share as Black Americans have the potential to both destroy us internally as individuals and unite us as a community. As a Black man, I don't go a day without experiencing fear. And hopefully you can recognize the ongoing struggles within my community because we all know what it feels like to be afraid of something. And if we really start to make a difference, we can use fear to create, to share, and to inspire one another, and to grow together. Thank you.